Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know people are still getting connected, but I wanted to welcome you all. I'm Sarah Chapman, and I'm the Executive Director of the nonprofit Media Burn Archive, which is based in Chicago. Media Burn collects, produces, and distributes documentary and experimental video created by artists, activists, and community groups. Our mission is to use archival media to deepen context and encourage critical thought through a social justice lens. This event is part of a free ongoing series called Virtual Talks with Video Activists, which creates conversations surrounding media production. Tonight, or this morning, we are excited to be presenting a screening and discussion with 3 electronic art pioneers, Darcy Gerbarg, Frances Giloth, and Louise Ledeen. And I want to thank Helena Shashkovich for putting together this incredible lineup of artists. Our moderator is Cynthia Goodman, who is a museum director and curator who championed the use of the computer as an artistic tool long before her museum colleagues were ready to do so. So I will just give you a couple pieces of information before we start. There will be time for you to ask questions of the artists. You can do that either in the chat or by raising your hand. But until that point, please stay muted so that we can all hear everyone speaking. Later on, if you do want to raise your hand, you can navigate to the bottom of your screen and use that reactions button. If you click that, there's a little hand raise button. And of course, you're welcome to use the chat. Another thing to note is that there is a live transcript going on right now. And if you want to turn it on or turn it off, you can either have it be subtitles on the bottom of the screen or as a full transcript on the side of the screen. And so in order to interact with that transcript feature, just click the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and you'll be able to switch between options. With that, so the event's being recorded. So if you know someone who wanted to attend and wasn't able to, we'll have that link ready in a couple days and people will be able to watch it later. And let's see, any other things? Our next event in 2 weeks is going to be celebrating the centenary of Howard Zinn. We're going to be featuring 2 documentary filmmakers, Deb Ellis and Dennis Smuller, who made a wonderful documentary about Howard Zinn called Howard Zinn, You Can't Be Neutral on the Moving Train. So please join us in 2 weeks if you're interested in that. So with that, I will turn it over to our wonderful moderator, Cynthia Goodman.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. My job today is to set the stage for our panelists, Darcy Gerbarg, Frances Giloth, and Louise Ledeen. Max, could I have the first slide, please? Max? Can you hear me? Thank you, sorry. We're reverting back to a sort of old time. Next slide, please, in these presentations. So please, well, put up with it. In any event, my job in introducing everyone is to set the background for their presentations and to give a good sense of the climate in the art world for accepting the sort of art that was to be shown at SIGGRAPH in particular and art and technology shows in general. Max, next slide, please. Max, thanks. On the screen now is an outline of what was happening in the art and technology world prior to the first SIGGRAPHs that we're talking about, and that's 1980. In 1967, an amazing program was initiated at the LA County Museum by curator Maurice Tuckman. And Maurice had the strong belief that mating significant corporations with significant artists would produce significant artworks. And that program really was an early stellar success. Also basing itself on a similar premise was the organization Experiments in Art and Technology that was founded by artist Robert Rauschenberg and engineer Billy Kluver in 1967. In 1968, Pontus Hultén, curator at the Museum of Modern Art, organized an exhibition, The Machine at the End of the Machine Age. And in documenting artists' attitude toward technology, Pontus Hult's show at MoMA began with a drawing by Leonardo. Cybernetic Serendipity, organized by Jascha Reichart the following year at the London Institute of Contemporary Art, showed really how pervasive the use of computers to make art already was. And this exhibition included art, poetry, music. It was really a landmark exhibition. And in '70, in New York City at the Jewish Museum, Jack Burnham organized the exhibition, Information Technology, Its New Meaning for Art. And this show, with the premise of showing how computers worked in a museum environment, actually showed how at that day, computers didn't work in a museum environment, and caused the whole field actually to go way backwards. In '72, the International Computer Art Festival was held at the Kitchen. And in '73, another International Computer Art Festival, also at the Kitchen, and Louise Ledeen, our panelist, was one of the co-directors of that festival. And in '75, again, Louise was one of the directors of an exhibition that was held at the City University Graduate Center and Anthology Film Archives as part of the National Computer Conference in New York City. So as you see, prior to 1980, there was a lot of attention internationally on art, science, and technology, and computer art itself. Next slide, please. I mentioned experiments in art and technology, and on the left you see their contribution, their most really stellar contribution, which was the design for the pavilion for Pepsi at the 1970 World's Fair in Osaka, Japan. And on the right of your screen is the contribution by the Architecture Machine Group from MIT to the software show at the Jewish Museum. This installation was called Seek. The basic premise established by the MIT engineers was that their computer program could outsmart the 4 gerbils who were trapped in this cage in which their computer program controlled a big mechanical arm and tried to readjust these plexiglass cubes. Well, much to their horror and dismay, the gerbils outsmarted the computer. The whole installation was a total disarray and brought a lot of consternation on the art viewing public and negative press. Next slide, please. As a matter of fact, it was largely thanks to these gerbils and the MIT installation that Thomas B. Hess, critic from Art News, wrote about this show. The big point in art and technology manifestations over the past 10 years has been that none of the technology works. That was quite a scathing commentary. And even Mike Knoll, a Bell Labs engineer who, of many of the computer scientists, had a strong underpinning in the art world, and himself, working with the plotter systems at Bell Labs in New Jersey, created drawings inspired by Mondrian and Picasso. But yet you can see by his quote on the screen, even Mike Knoll had doubts. Next slide, please. My first SIGGRAPH, the first SIGGRAPH art show was in 1980, but the first art show that I attended was in 1981 with a lot of arm twisting by panelist Darcy Gerbarg. But I must say that once I was there, I was intrigued by the work, intoxicated by the capabilities of the computer systems on display. And part of my intoxication was attributed to the moment, like the one when Nelson Max's animation, Carla's Island, completed in the film and video review. Literally, the whole audience was so astounded by how Max had radically advanced techniques for portraying natural phenomena that when the film was over, everyone in the audience stood and gave him a standing ovation. I'd never experienced anything like that in the traditional world, and I was, well, hooked from then on. Next slide, please. My first year of true involvement was SIGGRAPH 82. That year, Darcy was organizing the art show catalog in addition to a number of other roles, and she asked me to write an essay for that catalog. Now, the status of SIGGRAPH at that moment was virtually anybody you wanted to approach or talk with or interview, as I did, was not only accessible, they were flattered. And as a consequence, I began my serious study of computer art and what became computer art history at that show by speaking with literally almost every artist who was there. And that was a pretty extraordinary opportunity, and that environment was intoxicating. Next slide, please. Despite the advances in computer technology, despite the pervasiveness of the art and technology shows and the incredible interest in the field, the computer art world was haunted by this refrain, and we all got it. But is it art? This is a review of a show that I did in the late 1980s. This refrain was the topic of panels and lectures, on and on and on. Even when I went to my first SIGGRAPH when I participated really in 1982, I was working at the Guggenheim, and I couldn't tell any of my colleagues where I was going. I began my career in the computer art world feeling like a closet techie. But next slide, please. This mistrust, I guess I will call it, an apprehension about the capabilities of the computer and its role in the art world lasted quite forcefully through the 80s, the 90s, and some may even say it still lingers today, and we may talk about that later in our discussion. But I'm putting this in closing. The artists will be showing some of their work. This is a flyer for a program that was held at the Smithsonian, the Archives of American Art, in May 2022. And the impetus for this program was initiated by their accessioning all of my computer art papers, films, videos, slides, archival material gathered through the years I've been writing and studying the computer art field. And they held a 2-day symposium with museum colleagues from across the country to determine what was the best way for studying and preserving computer art and art history and making it available to succeeding generations of researchers and other scholars. So the question, but is it art, was finally answered successfully for me. Thank you. I would next like to introduce our other panelists, beginning with Darcy Gerbarg. Darcy has been active in the computer art field since the early days. She began incorporating computer technology in her artwork first in the late 70s. She had a significant role, she will describe exactly that role, in SIGGRAPH 1980. And then in 81 and 82, her roles increased. And she was art show chair in 81 and co-chair with Copper in 1982. Darcy.
Hello. Nick, hi, I'm Darcy Gerbarg. I'm going to kind of give you a picture of what it was like as an artist to go to SIGGRAPH and be part of that organization in some ways. Nick, I need you to go through these slides pretty quickly. So next slide, what you're seeing here in the background is one of my pictures. Can we go forward, Nick? So I got into computer graphics started by doing some research. And in '79, I came across Alvy Ray Smith's paper on the color cube. I was an abstract expressionist painter. I was part of a group of artists in New York. I was a young member in my early 20s in a group that included Clement Greenberg and Jules Olitsky, Helen Frankenthaler, Larry Poons, Ken Nolan, and Cynthia Goodman. Could we have the next slide, please? I contacted Tom DeFonte, and he was very generous, invited me to come to SIGGRAPH for $25 or for free if I helped out. So I arrived as a volunteer, and I felt I didn't know anything, really. I had just started looking into the field. And so at that conference, there were two side-by-side big presentation rooms with thousands of men in them. And they were continually showing computer graphics images on screens. I stood in the right between where those two rooms were, where the door was, where the wall was, and I could see into the two rooms. And as people came and went, I grabbed them and I said, is this analog or digital? We have to remember that this was, video was also a new technology at that time, and it was just starting to have some options for computer control. And Louise is very knowledgeable about that, and we'll speak more about that. Could we move on, please? At that conference, I met a lot of the people who were doing computer graphics, and Ephraim Cohen, who was also at NYIT, which is New York Institute of Technology, with Alvy Ray Smith, invited me to go to the lab and to try out that paint program. It turns out that was the first 24-bit paint system that existed that anyone could really get access to, and actually almost no people did have access to it. So, but it was about the only 24-bit or full color paint system at that time. You have to remember, Apple and IBM did not have available color systems until after this time. Maybe they had 8 colors, 6 colors, 16 colors, something like that. And there were no color printers. There were only color plotters, machines that could draw colored lines, and maybe you would get 8 colors, something like that. Anyway, I started using that system, and it was absolutely the perfect tool for me. I was interested in color and where color sat in space. Could we have the next slide, please? So I had been to the SIGGRAPH conference in 1979, and I contacted 3M because I was making pictures on computer systems, and they were just on the computer. No one could see them. So I kept trying to find ways to take my images out of the computer into physical mediums. And I discovered 3M had a large billboard size inkjet printer that could actually reproduce my paintings on canvas to scale. I asked SIGGRAPH to give 3M a booth, and 3M agreed to make 2 scanamurals, one of mine, which was 9 foot by 12 foot, and one of Lauren Carpenter's. And these were shown at the 1980 SIGGRAPH in Seattle. In addition, a number of the students who were in Tom DeFonte's and Dan Sandine's classes in Chicago wanted to show some of their work. They did not have a 24-bit system. They were all doing their own programming, and they believed that really the program was the artwork, not the final piece. They printed out their work on computer paper, and those pieces were then pinned to a curtain. I thought of this as the first SIGGRAPH art show, but it was not official. Could we have the next slide, please? Here are some of the pieces that were in the first official SIGGRAPH art show, which was in 1981. What is particularly interesting about this list for me is to see who had works in this exhibition. Basically, I invited everyone who was making images with computers to send some work for this exhibition. And it's interesting to note that who's on this. There are more people in this exhibition. I could only fit this number on this slide, but these slides are available in the SIGGRAPH archive. Could we have the next slide, please? I want to make something clear. I did not propose to SIGGRAPH in 1980 that they allow me to do an art show in 1981. The chairman actually approached me and asked me, having seen these scanamurals, if I would do a conference. I was very flattered, but I didn't really feel completely qualified by a long shot. Could we have the next slide, please? In doing my research, Ruth Levitt's book was quite a big help. She has a number of artists profiled, and some of these artists did, I approached some of these artists and some did have work in the exhibition. Next slide, please. Among the people who helped me find artists was Ray Lozana. I met him at an art show in San Francisco that I had work in. And at that time also, John Dunn came by, and he was actually a student out of Chicago, and he had written a paint system for Chrome-Emco. At that point, I was traveling around to California looking for additional paint systems to use, and he invited me, of course, to use his. I also met Mike Knoll, actually in 1980, as he and I were both adjunct faculty at the Interactive Telecommunications program. So he knew some artists. Avi Ray Smith and Ed Catmull at Pixar knew some artists. Basically, I invited every artist I could find and put them in the exhibition. Next slide, please. As Cynthia mentioned, a lot of the artwork created at this time was actually called scientific visualization. I think Tom DeFonte, the legendary chair of the SIGGRAPH organization, coined that phrase. And it identifies the images that were created by the computer scientists who were advancing the technology of computer graphics. And it was how they showed what they had been able to write algorithms to do. Now, I was a painter coming from a more traditional art background. I was not part of this technical community. I just sort of walked into it. I believed that an artwork was a piece of art that an artist had created. I did not believe that it was a program necessarily, unless there was some visual aspect. I didn't think it was a visual artwork. I also felt, and I did take a couple programming classes, but I knew some of these computer scientists, and as I met them and saw the work that they did, it was clear to me I was never going to be as good a programmer as they were. I felt, however, that because artists had better art skills and their life's motivation and direction was to make art, that they would be better equipped to make great art with the tools that these fabulous computer scientists created. Anyway, it was murky territory, particularly since several of the computer scientists had taken a number of art classes and had good art skills. Very few artists knew how to program, but some did, particularly the younger group. And one of the things we always talked about was how future generations would have both art skills and excellent computer programming skills, which I think has turned out to be the case. Could I have the next slide, please? As Cynthia pointed out, the question in the air was, is it art? I did not at that time know very many artists who were using computers. It was a very small, fragmented field, and most of the people making pictures with computers were computer scientists and engineers because they had access to the technology. They were not part of any art world. In a way, they were closet artists who thought they might be making art, but weren't sure. In those days, the early days, they weren't calling themselves artists. I showed their work at the SIGGRAPH art show. Someone else could decide if it was or was not art and whether it was good art or bad art. As part of my reply to the Chicago group about the program being the art, I asked Tom Duff, who was at Pixar, and then at NYIT, and then at Pixar, and who was reputed to be the best Unix programmer, to write me a one-page program that had something in it only a computer scientist would get. And I blew it up, I framed it, and I hung it in the art show. Next slide, please. This is a quirky little thing. I had been working on this art show for SIGGRAPH for several months when I got a call from the SIGGRAPH, a member of the SIGGRAPH board, and told that the Dallas Convention Center did not have enough room for an art show. Now, I want you to think about the size of the Dallas Convention Center. So I called Clem Greenberg, and I told him that I needed to find a venue in Dallas for the art show. And he told me to call the director of the Dallas Fine Art Museum, which I did. He recommended 2 locations, and I selected the one that was part of the Dallas Convention Center, where it connected to an office tower in the entrance lobby. SIGGRAPH provided a very small amount of money for the exhibition, and I called in favors with my wholesale framer in New York and stretched and framed most of the artwork for this exhibition in my studio with my assistant. I point this out because, in a way, there would not have been a SIGGRAPH art show if they had decided not to have it, if I was not able to reach into the art world and get some assistance. And I'm glad I did, and it's good that it worked out. Now, I was promised more money the next year if the SIGGRAPH art show that I put up was good enough, basically. And fortunately, everyone liked it a lot. And SIGGRAPH has been funding art shows every year ever since. Next slide. Here are some places where you can get more information about the SIGGRAPH 81 art show and other art shows. Next slide. This is the SIGGRAPH 82 art show catalog. It's the first catalog that we did for a SIGGRAPH art show. Next slide, please. And this is the first page. Next slide, please. This is the art show committee, and it sort of explains what responsibilities we took on. Next slide, please. These are the authors of the articles in this catalog, and these articles are quite extraordinary. I hope everyone here gets a chance to see them and read them. G came from really the video art end of things. He was the Chicago group were big fans of his. I didn't really realize until recently that the department that had video at Chicago was so influential. And they were very involved also with the SIGGRAPH organization, which explains to me why they felt that moving images were the only things that were really extremely important about where this technology was going. And of course, I didn't agree. Mike Knoll came out of the technical side. He had been making computer art since the 60s. And his piece, of course, was from that perspective. Cynthia Goodman has already introduced herself. And she went on to mount really the next really big, wonderful computer art exhibition with IBM funding and to direct their museum in New York. Next slide. This is the cover of the catalog for Digital Visions, Computers and Art, which was the big traveling exhibition that Cynthia mounted. Next slide, please. I felt that among the highlights of this SIGGRAPH 82 art exhibition was Stan Vanderbeek's steam installation. He had first shown that in the Breuer building, in their outdoor courtyard. It was a closed-in courtyard. And I recommend anyone check that out. It was really a wonderful piece. A few of the artists in this exhibition and in the 81 exhibition have gone on to productive art careers. Some have moved on to other endeavors, which is why when I look at the pictures of the artists in the art show catalogs, it's interesting to think about what they did go on to, many of the people who created those images. And of course, some are no longer with us. It's my belief that in the end, serious artists must stand their work alongside the best art created in any time. When we ask ourselves if the works exhibited in the SIGGRAPH art shows stand up to the best art created at any time, what is our answer? Next slide. This is a selection of the work that I showed at SIGGRAPH art exhibitions over the years. These are thumbnails. You can see more of my work on my website. Next slide, please. These are some examples of some work starting in 1979 until the present. The picture Vibrant Band is one of my new AR enhanced paintings, and there's a QR code that goes with it. And with that QR code, the AR sculpture that is captured as a VR sculpture in this painting projects out of the painting into the space. And I want to extend an invitation to everyone to come visit my VR art exhibitions in AltSpace VR and ArtGate VR. Next slide, please. Oh, finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy. You've given a wonderful orientation to those early SIGGRAPH shows, your work, and situated us historically. So it's now my pleasure to let our presentations continue with Copper Giloth. Copper's an artist and professor emerita from the University of Massachusetts. Excuse me. Copper chaired the 1982 and 83 SIGGRAPH exhibitions, and she's currently working on a virtual reality reconstruction of a 17th century labyrinth at Versailles that sounds truly intriguing. Copper.
Hello. I'll go kind of fast on this. I will discuss my early work from the 80s, jump to my current work, make a few remarks about the SIGGRAPH 82 and 83 art exhibitions, and then show excerpts of the 1982 artist interviews so you can hear what people were actually saying right then. Having been trained as a classical figurative sculptor, I arrived in Chicago in 1977, and by 78 was in the electronic visualization program at UIC. It was here that my storytelling and landscape imaging emerged. The Chicago computer video artist community was exciting. I learned to code in Tom DeFonte's graphics language, SIGGRAPH, enabling me to create stories and drawings. The computer was providing a way to disengage from the rigidity of the art world. I was influenced by the video artist Phil Morton, who made diatribes about problems with his GM van. I was also influenced by Martha Rossler's parody of traditional female roles. Out of this came Skippy Peanut Butter Jars, a self-portrait and a repositioning of the female body. My symmetry drawing program was based on a set of rotations and reflections of a small object that gets repeated to create a landscape. This interactive program was influenced by the artists from the 60s and 70s who used plotters to make their drawings. The drawings of Colette and Charles Bangert were particularly important. To make these drawings on paper, I fused my plotter and video methods to program a pen plotter to draw the raster image next. A line at a time across the paper like a slow video scan. This interface came together with the expertise of Patty Harrison and Dan Sadowski. Field 17 uses the same printing technique, but incorporates multiple layers of color. Over the years, my storytelling focused on my life and my struggles and adventures with the changing digital technologies. Much of the last 10 years has been about how to inhabit a 3D reconstruction of a 17th century Versailles labyrinth in AR and VR environments and be able to experience the stories presented in the garden fountains. I was finally given access to the archives at Versailles to take 25,000 photographs of the 39 extant sculpture remnants to use photogrammetry to reconstruct 3D objects for my work. My most recent artist book, Deliveries, is the tale of my life during COVID, visualized through the low-resolution still life photos emailed to me from Amazon showing delivery packages on my porch. On to the SIGGRAPH art exhibitions. You already have some background from Cynthia and Darcy, so I will focus on images of the actual exhibitions. In 1982, the show was in Boston. We had an open competition receiving over 1,000 entries of hard copy works, video, and installations. Many of the artists and researchers who were in the show assisted with the installation. The show included work of artists who had been exhibiting with digital technologies from the 60s and 70s to people who had just gotten into the field in the early 80s. Here you can see a selection of images from the show. In 1983, we expanded the show to having our installation at SIGGRAPH Detroit and slightly smaller versions of the show in Avignon and Tokyo. We made exhibition catalogs for both the US and the Japanese exhibitions. These 2 additional locations expanded into 30 locations for the SIGGRAPH 83 show in the USA, France, Japan, Canada, and Italy. Much of the work on these traveling exhibitions was headed up by Joanne Culver. She, along with Jesse Reed, installed the show in Avignon at the Theater Festival. Lauren Hare and Yuriko Kuchiki worked with the Isitan Museum in Tokyo and the making of the Japanese catalog. Cynthia Neal, art show administrator, was essential in coordinating everyone to make these shows a success. On the left is a tile piece by Darcy Gerbarg, and on the right, a sculpture by David Morris. Our black velvet darkroom approach made it possible to have light-emitting works next to lighted works. The Avignon show was in the Palais de Pape buildings. Part of the Isitan exhibit space is on the left and Sally Rosenthal's wraparound installation on the right. A selection of artworks from the people from Detroit and Tokyo. And finally, in Japan, unlike the US, the show was even publicized on the subways. We will now look at a few excerpts of artist interviews from SIGGRAPH 82. Locations are here for all the work shown today. Please play the video.
There wasn't an art show 5 years ago, at least that I know of. And I think the big step from last year's art show, which as I understand was the first one, to this year was that there was the addition of installations that effectively took a jump from being still art kind of stuff to being that you put on the wall to having installations and a lot of videotapes and a lot of still video images that are looking very, very well on high-resolution monitors. Well, the thing that appears to me to be what's going on is that the museum, gallery, art world context cannot hold the popularization of a new technology that's spreading around the globe. And the idea of SIGGRAPH is that it happens in a different location every year, and as a result, those who are on the frontier, either in the consumer front or on an industrial research front, a military front, or what have you, are so deeply interested in graphics, in making pictures, that they just go right through the old establishment world of the art system, of galleries, of museums, come together for a short time in a funky hotel complex, and like, bam, there it is. That's the best we got. and here's an art show. Bam, it's the best we got, and here's a fantastic computer graphics show that there is nothing that rivals it in the planet, on the planet.
And doesn't it seem like there's a greater reliance on the creative talent?
Oh yeah, I mean here
than
we
anything.
have, here, to me this place strikes me as being a situation where we have comprehensiveness. In other words, somebody who is not just hanging out as an art director or an artist who does one thing, but somebody who participates at many different levels in the thing. You know, they make the art, right? They display the art.
What has been really most challenging and exciting for me in terms of writing about the work on exhibition in the SIGGRAPH 82 art show has been the fact that until now so little serious art criticism has existed about the computer art field. And I think this, for the great part, has existed. There's been such a hesitancy among members of the art community to treat anything that has the word computer involved in it with seriousness. And I think this has as much to do with ignorance as fear. Fear of the fact that a computer at some point could replace the artist. And I think the more that I've looked at the pieces in the exhibition and more that I've become familiar with the technology, the more essential I see the role of the artist is. And although the technology is what makes possible so many new methods for aesthetic exploration, the role of the artist is as essential as it ever was.
I see that's going to be a serious problem because computer graphics and video and film and even old-fashioned photography is just slowly, old-fashioned photography has just been accepted, and it's actually now one of the growing art collecting sort of interests that is happening in this particular year, last couple of years. So photography is now 75 years old and it's slowly been accepted. One can make a scenario where, if we're lucky, we will all be well out of the way by the time they get around to collecting the work we're doing now. I make a joke with collector friends that I said, if you were smart, I mean, I would go out and buy computer graphics art because it'll be just like early photography is something being rediscovered. You know, if you were smart, you would invest in it now because people are practically giving it away, I mean, as it stands now. Simply because nobody really appreciates it or even has any, really, basically even an interest in it. There's a sort of a hostile interest in it. So one wonders how...
I met with Nam June Paik recently. He just had the show at the Whitney Museum.
Yes.
And we were discussing both video art and computer graphics.
Yes.
His comment, which I thought was quite interesting, was that he felt it wouldn't really make it as a collectible item until...
Okay, I think we're going to probably move on to Cynthia again to introduce Darcy. I mean, to introduce Louise.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Copper. And our last presenter is Louise Ledeen. Louise has had a varied career as videographer, inventor, curator. She's also had a professional career in the non-artistic world. Most importantly for us, in 1985, Louise chaired the SIGGRAPH art show. She had such a complex, impressive show in multiple venues that she took off the entire year before just to plan it. I think that Louise can give us a really wonderful sense of how SIGGRAPH 85 invaded San Francisco in her presentation. Louise.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Yes.
To finish Namjoon's thought with Stan Vanderbeek, what he said was, until you can hang the display on the wall like a painting, no one is going to invest in collecting video art, which is kind of true. So I'm going to talk about the SIGGRAPH 85 art show, which was in San Francisco. I was the art show chair and Rachel Carpenter was the art show administrator, although she did much more than that. She was really one of the co-producers of the event. The art show jury consisted of Kathy Ray Huffman, Robin King, Margot Lovejoy, Bo Takahara, and Woody Vasulka. Next slide, please. So I think, first of all, it was the first and only SIGGRAPH that was held in San Francisco, which was kind of interesting. And as Cynthia mentioned, I just basically took a leave of absence from my job and took what I called a personal sabbatical to chair this art show. And in the 70s and early 80s, I had curated a number of video art and computer graphic shows. And my goal was really to extend the San Francisco SIGGRAPH show beyond the Moscone Center and really have a number of different SIGGRAPH art installations around the city. As I mentioned, Rachel was really doing a lot of the production work on the show in terms of gathering the materials, working with the volunteers, and we had an art show committee of 21 people. So there was a lot of moving parts. Next slide. So here's a little look at the 85 art show catalog. Rachel Carpenter in the top center wearing her Andre and Wally B sweatshirt from Pixar. A bunch of volunteers who were in the break room. There's David Lawrence up front to the left, who has become a fairly influential artist in his own right. And in the center are the committee, Margot, Woody, Robin King, myself, Rachel, and Bo Takahara, and I believe Kathy Ray Huffman was taking the photograph. And you can't really see on the far right, but it's a guy with a big ladder hanging the show. We only had 2 days to hang the show. We had 3,000 entries, which was sort of exponential from 83. And so we found these great clips that had Velcro on them that you could then put the picture, have the Velcro in the back of the frame and just stick it right on the gray wall. So that was the only way we were able to mount the show in 2 days. Next slide. So again, taking the show out into San Francisco, we had the juried show at Moscone Center. We had an interactive event at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art called Input Output Computer Graphics Festival. And then an evening, which I'll talk about a little bit later, called Art in the Computer, which was held at the Herbst Theater. In addition, we had 2 installations at the Exploratorium. One was Invisible Cities by Jeffrey Shaw, based on the Italo Calvino novel. And then the Goethe Institute supported an installation called Frontiers of Chaos by Peter Richter and Hans Otto Peichen, both of which were really quite wonderful. Next slide. So the input and output exhibit was a hands-on exhibit. Bo Takahara, who is a curator at San Francisco MoMA, was instrumental in making this happen. We had live hand-on events, and the museum was thrilled because they had the largest number of teenage boys come to the museum for the event, and it kind of totally skewed their numbers in terms of demographics. So that was kind of fun. And people were making stuff and controlling stuff and rearranging their faces on screens. It was a lot of fun. And then for the evening event at the Herbst, Larry Cuba and Gene Youngblood and Ed Emschweiler and Ed Tannenbaum all were there presenting on their work, and some demonstrations as well. Next slide. We also had, as many of the SIGGRAPH art shows had, were sort of online images on displays. We didn't have black velvet, unfortunately, Copper, but we still able to see them. And these are the people who contributed images. It wasn't a curated show. People just brought their images and loaded them on the computer, and it ran. And then for the animation display, Mark Cantor and Jay Fenton put together these display areas using the Mac computers. And we had over, I never even counted, but over 40 artists brought their animations with them. So again, it was a very popular part of the exhibit. Next slide. At the Palace of Fine Arts on the Monday night course reception, there was a dance performance by the Rush Dance Troupe called RAB, and Patricia Renee was the dancer and choreographer. Rebecca Allen, who at the time was at NYIT, did the computer graphics, and Carter Burwell did the original electronic music score. Donna Cohn, who was a teacher at the Academy of Art College Gallery, mounted a student poster exhibition. And one of my favorite things we did, you talk about events like this being transitory, you work a whole year on it or a year and a half on it, and then it's over, it's gone. And so Michael decided to do a time-lapse video of the Moscone Exhibition Center, showing it from a blank floor, building up the exhibits, everybody at the exhibits, tearing them down, and ending up with another blank floor. And so we took that video and made it into a video disc. So it was very apropos of what the whole event was like. Next slide. So then we took the show on the road. Half of the show went to the Isata Museum, again in Tokyo, and half of the show went to Spain with the help of a gentleman named Xavier Berenguer, who had a computer graphics production company in Barcelona. And this was held at the Reina Sofia Art Museum. It was the first show at the museum. And I found out while I was there that the museum had been a mental institution / prison for dissidents during the Franco regime. And after they renovated the space, the church, the priest came in and did an exorcism to get out all of the bad juju at the museum. But it was a beautiful space, and sort of the juxtaposition of, these computer art pieces among these naves and columns. It was glorious. Next slide, please. And this is the catalog to the left of the Isata Museum. And then on the right is the cute little ticket they made for entry, which I really loved and have a few of them still in my archive. Next slide. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Milton Commissar, but he did a beautiful light sculpture for the exhibit, for the SIGGRAPH exhibit called Four of a Kind. And it was my pleasure to be there with him while he was trying to work with the people who were installing it, who spoke very little English. Milton does not speak Japanese. And so fortunately, the pieces kind of go together like, little Legos. So it wasn't that difficult, but we finally got it up and running. Next slide. And this is the catalog from Procesos, which was the name of the exhibit in Spain. And it was, again, quite wonderful. Next slide. So I just want to kind of take this last slide to talk a little bit about what was taking place in 1985 in regards to computer graphics. And then I'll talk a little bit about what was spoken about before in terms of my background in sort of analog video synthesizers for my artwork, and then moving into curating computer graphics art and what I thought about that. So what was interesting, I thought, in '85 is that the popular personal computers really expanded. And so people had much more access to small computers to start to do their work. PageMaker from Aldus came out. Adobe Photoshop was introduced. Apple introduced the laser writer. And so suddenly people were able to do desktop publishing with 15 fonts that looked like, a ransom note, and eventually kind of figured it out. It wasn't all that pleasant to look at. Dire Straits, for those of you who are alive, did their Money for Nothing music video, first music video with computer graphics. And the highlight in at SIGGRAPH was the stained glass night in the Young Sherlock Holmes film. Again, as Cynthia described what it was like when Nelson Mack showed his piece. This was the first fully realized CGI character in a motion picture, and people went nuts. And this was done, David Murin did the, I guess, art direction, and Lasseter did the actual computer graphic animation. It was also the year that MIT Media Lab opened in the new IMP building, which is stunning. Stuart Brand and Larry Brilliant started the WELL, the Whole Earth Electronic Link. C++ programming language was published. And at SIGGRAPH, there were 2 awards given. One was the Stephen Anson Kuntz Award, which went to Pierre Bezier, who was only the 2nd recipient of that prize. And people must know of the Bezier curve and the Bezier patch. He was an engineer at Renault in France, and he wanted to show that to his management that if you could create curves, you could create better looking cars on the computer. And Loren Carpenter won the Achievement Award for many, many things that he had done to that point, which was his work in fractals, his creation of the A buffer, his early work in rendering, which then became RenderMan. And so it was really nice for him to get recognized that way. And I think that's it in terms of slides. But one thing I just wanted to say was that, you know, working in the 70s in analog video synthesis, besides being able to make moving color animations and the transmitted light versus the reflective light, which was really appealing to me, the whole idea was to take something that was real, be it in a camera or on a videotape, and then modulate it and distort it and make it something unreal. Computer graphics was kind of just the opposite. I mean, by 85, people were taking, you know, what Alvy Ray Smith now calls digital light or pixels or bits, and they were trying to create reality. And it was really interesting to see what people did in different areas of the world to create that reality. The Japanese did a lot of work in atmospheric conditions. French did a lot of work in gestures, you know, motion, bodies. US did a lot of work in cloth. Of course, there was ray tracing, there was terrain mapping. All of those things were kind of coming together. And it was one of those moments, I think, in 85 where you realized that it was going to happen. It wasn't there yet. And, you know, as we all know, the closer you get to it, you know, if you're at 90%, that last 10% is going to be a bitch to try to really make it look real. But it was on a trajectory, and we all knew it was going to happen. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Darcy. Thank you, Copper. We are, oh, sorry. Excuse me, I was talking with my mute on. Excuse me. I wanted to thank everybody. And I think we're now, unfortunately, at the end of our session. Correct, Helena and Sarah?
I think we can go another 10 minutes or so just to have more discussion and questions if you all want to.
Oh, that would be cool. And that's wonderful. Great. Because I did have some questions, so we can go ahead. I was really curious, what attracted our participants to SIGGRAPH the first year they attended? Can we start with Darcy? Darcy?
Actually, when I found Alvy's book article on the color cube, I was very excited about that, and I called him up. And he basically said to me, the SIGGRAPH organization has their annual meeting in 2 weeks in Chicago. If I see you there, maybe I'll take you more seriously. So I called Tom DeFonte, who was the chairman. and he was just a wonderful guy. And he asked me if I said, this is pretty expensive. I don't work for a company. I'm not faculty at a university. I have to pay this myself. And he said, do you fit into the indigent artist category? And I said, I'm not indigent, but I'm an artist. And so he said, he found me a motel near the conference for $25 a night. And he said, you can come for $25, and if you help, it'll be free. And I was intrigued, and I went. And it was just no looking back. I was, of course, in my early 20s, and I was, like many people in their 20s, really idealistic. And as I got more and more involved in computer art and making more art with this technology, I imagined, because I realized that we were speaking two very different languages, the technology group and the art group, that maybe there was a way to have a bridge between technology and art. I'm not sure about that now, this many years later. However, I do hear the same thing said by young people today. So,
interesting.
So I guess that's what drew me there. And what kept me there was the people, the excitement, the way the technology kept getting better and better, and the way the tool improved. And actually, Albie refers to Moore's Law as a driving force for how machines get bigger and better and faster and cheaper at that pace. And I could say for the last, 40 years or more, I've been able to continue to find the technologies I want to make the artwork I want.
Thank you, Darcy. Copper, do you remember what attracted you to SIGGRAPH your first year?
Yes. I was a graduate student. I'm echoing somehow. I was a graduate student at University of Illinois, and Tom DeFonte was president of SIGGRAPH, was the head of SIGGRAPH, and all the graduate students went to SIGGRAPH, and we all volunteered to do something. And I worked on the SIGGRAPH video review, and my first real job was very educational. I got set to solve the problems of attendees who had problems. So I dealt with everything. So I learned very quickly what was going on at the conference. And I dealt with a lot of unhappy people. So it was good training. And then I just kept doing other jobs. And I did the same thing as a professor. I got my students involved in going to SIGGRAPH. And so I perpetuated that. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Copper. Louise?
Well, my first SIGGRAPH was in San Jose in 1977. And I literally moved out of New York, got on a plane, flew to San Jose, walked down the street and bought a car, which was a big mistake. Don't ever do that. Got in the car.
Sound?
Sorry. So I was living in New York. I moved out of New York. I landed in San Jose. I bought a car. I drove to SIGGRAPH, and I had in my bag a bunch of videotapes that Tom told me to bring. And so I was sitting there again with a bunch of guys. A lot of them were from Lawrence Livermore Lab in San Jose. Got a tour of the lab in which every computer had a black cloth over it, as if I could read the blinking lights and make sense of them. But it was a great experience. I had never been involved in that kind of group of intensity about computer graphics, showed videotapes, had a lot of fun, and was hooked.
Cynthia, unmute yourself.
Whatever attracted all of us initially 40 plus years later, we're all still there. I think one final question, which I'm interested in, what was the biggest changes that you saw between SIGGRAPH 1980 and 85? Darcy?
Well, 1980 was in Seattle, and I think it was nowhere near the size of the SIGGRAPH in 85. SIGGRAPH over this time period really grew tremendously. I don't know what the numbers were, but I think it was a couple thousand men in maybe 79, 80, and maybe, I don't know, a dozen women, most of whom were students. By 85, I think maybe there were more women involved. And I think it was such a much bigger effort, and it was so art focused. And SIGGRAPH was less nervous about doing something with the art world and putting more money and commitment into doing art shows. I think that's not to mention what Louise brought to this, which was amazing.
I'm really sorry, everyone. Somehow my audio is off, and I'm not muted.
Hey, Natalie.
Hi. Cynthia, can I just ask a question?
Can you hear me? No.
We can hear you.
We can hear you. Can you hear me, Cynthia?
Well.
No.
Yes, I can hear you, Nat. Hi.
I just wanted to ask, because I came in a couple minutes late, and I so appreciate this. This was wonderful, and I would like to fall down all the rabbit holes with the links. So I'm wondering, I see everything in the chat, but I'm wondering if that will be provided afterwards so we can keep going. That's one comment. And my other comment is, Darcy, I just love your background so much. And I have to say that you are my living example of an artist who has just ridden the crest of technology, from your getting on to Tom with that first phone call, and to today with the AR pieces in front of whatever, in whatever con and East Hampton and all over. You know, you have not been dominated by technology, but you've really used it as a tool, and it's just so inspirational. I just have to say that. So this whole gathering is inspirational. It's just nice to see all these wonderful women pioneers again. Really, thanks so much. And let us know about the links and the archive.
Thank you, Natalie. By the way, this picture behind me is in Alvy asked for and reproduced in his book, The Biography of a Pixel. And if you haven't seen that book and you're interested in the history of computer graphics, it's fabulous. The book's fabulous.
I'll just add that we can definitely send a follow-up email to the participants. We'll send out a link to the recording, and we will also, send out the chat as well, since it sounds like a lot of people want to get those links.
Thank you very much, Sarah. This has been great.
So thank you again to everyone. Thank you for moderating, Cynthia. And I'd love to keep this conversation going and see you all again in the future. So
where are you sitting with all those videotapes behind you?
I'm in the Media Burn archive. This is our archive. We've got about 8,000 videotapes in this room.
Wow.
A lot of documentary and video art and community organizing. Studs Circle, you can see we have a lot with studs. So yeah.
That's such a flashback to see all those videotapes. I feel like I'm in the 1980s.
Yes, it's always the 70s, 80s, and 90s here.
Yeah. It was good.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.